Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down the threat of an ice storm today into tomorrow across much of the United States, stretching from the southern plains back into the Midwest and Ohio Valley, where we will be seeing some dangerous ice accumulation that could lead to travel impacts, in addition to some power outages, and we also could see some snowfall in parts of the Midwest, the Great Lakes region, and as well as the Northeast as we head further into the work week. I'll be giving you the latest breakdown on everything that you need to know in this forecast, and let's hop right into what this ice storm will be doing here across the United States over the next 48 hours. I do want to preface right off the bat that this particular storm is not going to be bringing an ice storm to absolutely everybody that's going to be seeing ice accumulation, because really the ice storm component of this is actually going to be quite isolated. And what an ice storm really means is that we're seeing greater than 1/4 of an inch of ice in a particular location. We're not really going to be seeing that in a lot of areas. Only some isolated locations will be seeing that, but with that being said, a large chunk of areas from the Midwest back through the southern plains will at least see a glazing of ice, which will lead to some travel impacts. And again, we'll be breaking that down for you in detail here in this forecast. But I do want to first begin with what's happening this afternoon. We are going to have some moisture coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. This is due to a low pressure system centered back out to the west. We're going to have some southerly winds picking up some of these shower and freezing rain activity across parts of the southern plains tonight. And I'll show you a better view of the future radar here in just a minute, but notice the freezing rain will be stretching from Nebraska and Iowa back into parts of North Texas. And once we go overnight tonight into tomorrow morning, that freezing rain will pick up in intensity. We'll have some moderate to potentially heavy freezing rain in northwest Arkansas and eastern Oklahoma. And what that means is that we're going to be dealing with quick accumulating ice, and we could easily see around 1/4 of an inch of ice in some spots in eastern Oklahoma and northwest parts of Arkansas. Once we go into Monday afternoon and evening, most of this turns into a cold rain for a lot of the southern plains. The only freezing rain left will be back up here on the northern side of this band of moisture, so back up in Missouri and back into parts of Illinois. So anywhere down in the southern plains, the ice that accumulates, most of it should melt by no later than Monday afternoon, but there will still be a little bit left over depending on where you are. Perhaps like northwest Arkansas, if you see upwards of 1/4 of an inch of ice, that might take a little bit longer to melt in those areas. Once we go into Tuesday morning, that freezing rain will move into the Midwest and the Ohio Valley. We'll be watching for that potential closely. Snow will become a concern for those from Iowa back into the Northeast. I say a concern, really, if you're bad at driving in snow, that's where the concern would come. There's not really going to be much concern, though, overall, because it's only going to be a few inches of snow for most areas. A couple spots might pick up a 1/2 foot back up in parts of, like, western New York, but again, you're pretty accustomed to that in those areas. Once we go to Tuesday evening, we'll be watching for another disturbance to develop back down in the southern plains. This particular storm could bring the threat of severe weather once we go into Wednesday, but that remains pretty uncertain in terms of the exact details, but there might be some isolated severe weather down there. Regardless, though, we'll be dealing with heavy rainfall near the Gulf Coast all the way through Thursday and Friday, and that will lead to the potential for flooding rains, and we'll be discussing that later in this forecast. Now we're going to go region by region with the timing and as well as ice accumulation that you can expect today. We'll begin first with the southern plains, and this is this morning, so overall really not much activity out there. The only activity that we'll have by around lunchtime would be back over here near the Texas Panhandle. I wouldn't rule out a little bit of freezing rain there, but I'm not too concerned about the Panhandle in particular. Once we get closer to around 2 o'clock, we'll be watching for some freezing drizzle near the DFW Metroplex. This will start to pick up more in intensity throughout the afternoon. Notice right around about 6 o'clock tonight, freezing rain will start to pick up a lot more, and I'm most concerned really about central and southern Oklahoma tonight. This will be the area to watch for some moderate to heavy freezing rain bands going into the evening hours, and once we get closer to 9, that freezing rain will move into parts of eastern Oklahoma and southeast Kansas. Notice we'll still be dealing with some freezing rain, though, back down in North Texas this evening. By midnight tonight, that picks up in intensity near the Red River Valley, and then once we go overnight tonight, that freezing rain will move into eastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas. That is where we're going to be dealing with some moderate to heavy bands of freezing rain, which again will lead to quick accumulating ice in these areas. Once we go closer to 6 a.m. on Monday, we'll be dealing with a little bit of freezing rain still in Oklahoma, perhaps a little bit in North Texas, but I think for the most part, the freezing rain will start to taper down in North Texas. And then once we get closer to around lunchtime on Monday, most of that freezing rain will be moving to areas in northern Arkansas and as well as southern Missouri and as well as eastern Oklahoma. Those areas will still be dealing with some freezing rain, but just after lunchtime, I would say, is when a lot of that will start to wind down in those areas and will transition into a cold rain by then. Now, in terms of ice accumulation, this is again an estimate. It might be slightly higher or lower depending on where you are, but I do think the highest totals individuals will fall here in this stretch of Oklahoma. So we're talking from southern Oklahoma back toward Tulsa. Those areas will be dealing with the potential for up to a quarter of an inch of ice. With that being said, in this particular area in southern and central Oklahoma, so just south of Oklahoma City, back near Ardmore, between that region, we're going to be probably watching for the threat of upwards of even a half an inch of ice in a few isolated locations, but that should remain very isolated. I don't think we're going to get to a half an inch, but we might get to like maybe 2/5 of an inch, for example, so around 0.4. And then back over into parts of southern Missouri and as well as northern Arkansas, we'll have pockets in here as well, and some of the higher elevations as well, with upwards of a quarter of an inch of ice as well. Back over in North Texas, primarily under a 1/10 of an inch of ice, so a glazing to a 1/10 of an inch. And then back over into parts of like central Arkansas, so near Little Rock, we might get a glazing of ice, but I wouldn't be too concerned about that area, but definitely be monitoring the weather very closely in case something does end up developing there with ice accumulation. Now further to the north and east for the Ohio Valley, overall Sunday looks pretty dry for most of the area. Once we go into late Sunday night into Monday morning, we will have freezing rain going across much of Missouri. This again will lead to some ice accumulation as we go into the morning hours Monday, even near St. Louis, so be very mindful, take a lot of caution on the roadways. There might be some that are not treated in these areas. Once we go into Monday morning, right around sunrise, there will be some light snowfall on the northern side of this near like Illinois, like northeast Illinois. We're talking like Chicago suburbs. This won't really accumulate much snow, but there will be some flurries. It'll be pretty fluffy snow overall. Once we go late Monday morning into the early afternoon hours, that freezing rain will pick up further out to the south of Chicago, back over in southern and central Illinois. So that'll pick up a little bit of intensity. Most of this will be light to moderate. And then once we get closer to the evening hour, so right around rush hour, that freezing rain will pick up a bit more from anywhere from Cleveland back into western Ohio. That'll be mostly isolated to widely scattered. More widespread freezing rain across northern Missouri and back through areas in central Indiana. And then once we get closer to around midnight or so, that freezing rain will really pick up in intensity, and we are going to see this pick up quickly. A lot of this will be light to moderate. There might be some pockets of heavy freezing rain as we go into the overnight hours, and that does mean that this will also accumulate pretty quickly before this all becomes, for the most part, a cold rain by the time we go into Tuesday morning. So in terms of ice accumulation in the Midwest, this is what we're looking at for early estimates. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel because there might be some changes to this. I would say that anywhere here in central and southern Illinois, back near the St. Louis area, I don't think we're going to be seeing a half an inch of ice accumulation. I wouldn't rule out in an isolated spot, but I think most areas around this region will be around a 1/10 of an inch of ice up to a quarter of an inch of ice, with maybe a few isolated locations over that number. So just keep that in mind. I think that's a bit of an overestimate, but elsewhere we are expecting a glazing of ice upwards of a 1/10 of an inch of ice for most areas. Even back near Kansas City, we'll pick up around a 1/10 of an inch of ice most likely out of this event, and back through areas like southern Missouri, I do think in many of those areas we'll see around a 1/10 to a quarter of an inch of ice out of this event, with areas like northern Ohio being a much more minimal amount of ice, which would be anywhere from like 1/100th of an inch of ice upwards of maybe a 20th of an inch of ice. Now in terms of areas in the Midwest for the snow potential, again there will be some freezing rain Monday night into early Tuesday morning, but we will see some snow out of this event. For the most part, the only snow that we'll be seeing will be Monday morning across areas near the Great Lakes, and then also going to Tuesday morning. Those will be your two opportunities for some snowfall, but by no means does this appear to be a full-blown snowstorm, and it will definitely not be a snow entree. We'll be looking at more than anything just ice cubes back down to your south, with maybe a few flurries, maybe a dusting in some areas. This is a snowfall accumulation. Again, early estimates. Overall, most areas a coating to 2 inches. I wouldn't be shocked if we get a few areas though around 1 to 3, maybe 2 to 4, and some isolated strands with this system. And then back over into central Michigan and as well as back into Canada, there will be a better chance of heavier snowfall back over in Canada that could get closer to a half a foot, but most of Michigan at this time is looking at more like 2 to 4 inches, with a few isolated locations getting closer to 6 inches of snow when this event is all said and done. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already.